It was a day like any other in the small, dusty town of Blackwater Gulch. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked earth as if it were reluctant to leave this forsaken place. Dust devils swirled through the streets, carrying with them whispers of secrets best left buried. Men in worn hats leaned against wooden railings, their spurs jingling softly as they exchanged tales of distant lands and stranger things. But little did they know that one such tale would soon become reality, and not in the way anyone could have imagined. The chickens had always been there. A peculiar sight for sure, but no one paid much attention to them at first. They gathered near the edge of town, close to the old barn where Mr. Granger used to keep his cattle before he disappeared under mysterious circumstances 3 years prior. No one spoke of him anymore. His name carried too many questions without answers. And now, those chickens, scrawny, mangy creatures with feathers missing in patches, had taken up residence by the barn's crumbling foundation. Folks passing by barely gave them a second glance until something strange began to happen. One morning, just as the sun peaked above the jagged mountains surrounding Blackwater Gulch, Sheriff Jonas Ridge rode into town on his trusty steed, Old Samson. His boots creaked as he dismounted, and his leather jacket flapped slightly in the dry breeze. He tipped his hat to Mrs. Harper, who stood outside her general store sweeping away dust from the porch steps. She nodded politely but said nothing. Her eyes darted toward the barn, and when she saw the sheriff follow her gaze, she hesitated before speaking. "Them chickens," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "They ain't normal, Sheriff." Jonas raised an eyebrow, leaning casually against the railing. "Chickens? Ma'am, I reckon you spent too much time out here in the sun." But Mrs. Harper shook her head firmly, her gray curls bouncing with each movement. "You don't understand. Every morning, they gather in a circle, perfectly still, like they're waiting for something. It's unnatural. Unnatural or not, Jonas decided to investigate. After all, it wasn't every day that someone accused poultry of being suspicious. He mounted Old Samson once more and headed toward the barn. As he approached, the scene unfolded before him exactly as Mrs. Harper described. Dozens of chickens standing in a tight circle, their heads bobbing ever so slightly as though listening to some unheard call. Their beady eyes glinted in the sunlight, and Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just animals anymore. There was something deliberate about their posture, until, that is, the ground beneath them collapsed. Without warning, the earth gave way with a thunderous crack, sending dirt and debris flying everywhere. Jonas reined in Old Samson sharply, nearly losing his balance as the horse whinnied in panic. The chickens scattered momentarily, only to regroup quickly around what appeared to be a gaping hole in the ground, a pit so deep its bottom couldn't be seen. Jonas stared down into the abyss, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in his chest. What lay below, and why had these chickens led him straight to it? Days turned into nights as word spread throughout Blackwater Gulch about the strange occurrence. Curiosity mingled with fear among the townsfolk, drawing even the most skeptical souls closer to the site of the sinkhole. By lantern light, groups of men gathered to examine the edges of the pit, debating whether it was worth investigating further. Some argued it might contain treasure hidden by prospectors long gone, while others whispered darker theories involving curses or supernatural forces. Among the crowd stood Clara May, a young woman known for her sharp wit and quicker temper. Her dark hair was tied back tightly, framing a face marked by determination rather than beauty. She had grown up hearing stories of the Wild West, from gold rushes to gunfights, and none of them prepared her for this. Still, she refused to let curiosity get the better of her. "They're chickens, folks," she shouted over murmurs, slamming her fist onto the makeshift table set up beside the hole. "Just chickens. Why are we acting like they're messengers from another world?" Her words fell on deaf ears, however, as several men began lowering a rope ladder into the pit. One brave soul volunteered to descend first. Hank Prescott, a grizzled miner whose hands bore calluses from years of hard labor. With a lantern strapped securely to his belt, he climbed down slowly, his shadow stretching impossibly large against the walls of the pit. Clara watched anxiously, clutching the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Below, Hank's voice echoed faintly upward. "There's something down here," he called, his tone both excited and wary. "Metal. Looks like a door." A murmur rippled through the crowd as everyone leaned forward to hear more. Metal doors didn't appear randomly in the middle of nowhere, or so they thought. This discovery only deepened the mystery surrounding the sinkhole. Clara exchanged glances with Jonas, who had remained silent since the initial collapse. His expression betrayed nothing, but his fingers tapped rhythmically against his holster, a nervous habit he rarely showed. "Bring him back up," Jonas ordered finally, his voice cutting through the anticipation. "We'll need tools to open whatever that thing is." Reluctantly, the group agreed, hauling Hank back to the surface. His face was pale, his breath coming in short gasps. "It's cold down there," he admitted shakily. "Colder than it should be. And there's carvings on the door, symbols I ain't never seen before." Symbols. That single word sent chills down Clara's spine. Symbols meant knowledge, intention, purpose. If someone or something had carved those markings, then perhaps the sinkhole wasn't merely a geological anomaly after all. By the time dawn broke again, the entire town had mobilized. Men worked tirelessly to construct scaffolding around the pit, ensuring safety for whoever dared venture inside. Women cooked meals over open fires, feeding anyone willing to help uncover the truth. Even children joined in, their laughter providing a stark contrast to the tension hanging heavy in the air. Jonas organized a team of 5 volunteers, including himself and Clara, to explore the depths of the pit. Each member carried a weapon, not out of fear necessarily, but out of caution. You never knew what dangers lurked beneath the surface in the Wild West. As they descended, the temperature dropped significantly, confirming Hank's earlier observation. Condensation formed on the walls, dripping steadily onto their helmets and shoulders. The lanterns flickered weakly, struggling to pierce the oppressive darkness. When they reached the bottom, the massive metal door loomed before them, its surface covered in intricate designs that seemed to writhe under dim light. Clara traced one of the symbols with her gloved finger, her brow furrowing in concentration. "These look ancient," she murmured, "like Native American hieroglyphs, but different somehow." Before anyone could respond, Jonas stepped forward, testing the door's solidity with a firm kick. It didn't budge, unsurprisingly, but the sound resonated through the chamber, causing the others to flinch instinctively. Little did they know, that single action triggered something far greater than anticipated. The ground trembled suddenly, throwing the explorers off balance. Lanterns swung wildly, casting eerie shadows across the walls. From somewhere deep within the structure came a low rumble, growing louder with each passing second. Then, without warning, the door slid open with a screech of rusted hinges. Beyond lay a cavern unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Gold coins spilled across the floor in glittering mounds, interspersed with jewels that caught the light like fire. Weapons of every kind lined the walls, swords, axes, daggers, all crafted from materials unfamiliar to the team. At the center of the room stood an altar, upon which rested a glowing orb pulsating with an otherworldly energy. Clara gasped, stepping backward instinctively. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. Jonas advanced cautiously, his hand hovering near his revolver. "Looks like a tomb," he replied grimly. "Or maybe a vault. Either way, we shouldn't disturb it." But then a voice echoed through the cavern, a voice neither human nor animal, yet unmistakably sentient. Too late, it intoned, chilling everyone to their core. "You've awakened me." Frozen in terror, the team watched as the orb atop the altar floated into the air, expanding until it filled the entire chamber with blinding light. When the brightness faded, a figure materialized before them, a being neither male nor female, its form shifting constantly between shapes and colors. Its presence radiated power, overwhelming and undeniable. "You sought knowledge," the entity declared, its voice reverberating like thunder. "Now you shall receive it. This land was never yours to claim. These riches belong to those who came before you, the ones you call Indians. Buried here lies their legacy, their history, their vengeance." Vengeance. The word struck fear into the hearts of every person present. Clara felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. though whether from awe or dread, she couldn't say. Beside her, Jonas clenched his jaw, refusing to show weakness even now. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside him. The entity tilted its head, studying them with an intensity that made their skin crawl. To remember, it answered simply, to honor the past instead of erasing it, to learn from your mistakes, or face consequences unimaginable. And with that, the cavern began to collapse, stone falling inward as though consumed by the very earth itself. The team scrambled upward, reaching the surface just as the last remnants of the sinkhole vanished entirely. Above them stretched the endless sky, dotted with stars beginning to twinkle in the twilight. As they caught their breath, Clara turned to Jonas, her voice soft yet resolute. "We can't ignore this," she said. "Not anymore. We owe it to ourselves and to those who came before to tell the truth." Jonas nodded solemnly, his thoughts mirroring hers. For all the myths and legends of the Wild West, none prepared them for the revelation they'd uncovered today. Yet perhaps, in acknowledging the past, they could forge a brighter future, one built on understanding rather than ignorance. And so, the story of the chickens gathered in a circle became legend, passed down through generations as a reminder of the mysteries hidden beneath the surface, and the courage required to confront them. The days following the incident at the sinkhole were filled with unease. The townsfolk of Blackwater Gulch couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, lurking just beyond the veil of their understanding. The chickens, now scattered and seemingly disoriented, wandered aimlessly through the streets, their once peculiar behavior replaced by an almost pitiable confusion. Some speculated that the strange entity had left its mark on them, while others dismissed it as mere superstition. But Clara May wasn't so quick to dismiss anything. Her mind raced with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. Who, or what, had created the vault? What purpose did the glowing orb serve? And why had the entity spoken of vengeance? These thoughts haunted her every waking moment, driving her to dig deeper into the town's history. She spent hours poring over old maps and documents in Mrs. Harper's general store, searching for clues that might explain the enigma beneath their feet. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty streets, Clara stumbled upon a faded journal tucked away in a corner of the store. Its leather cover was cracked and worn, but the pages inside were surprisingly intact. The handwriting was neat, though occasionally erratic, as if the author had been overcome with emotion during certain entries. Intrigued, Clara began reading aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "March 14th, 1857, she recited softly. "Today we buried the first of our people here, beneath this land that betrayed us. They say gold brings prosperity, but all I see is suffering. The miners come, tearing apart the earth, disturbing sacred grounds. We warned them, begged them to stop, but they refused to listen." Clara paused, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just any journal. It belonged to someone from the indigenous tribes who had lived in the region long before settlers arrived. As she continued reading, the entries grew darker, filled with accounts of broken treaties, stolen lands, and brutal massacres. The writer spoke of prophecy, a warning passed down through generations, that one day the spirits of the ancestors would rise to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Until that point, Clara had always viewed history as distant, impersonal, a series of events that happened to other people in other places. But now, staring at the words scrawled across yellowed paper, she realized how deeply intertwined her own life was with the tragedies of the past. Blackwater Gulch wasn't just a town. It was a scar, a reminder of humanity's capacity for greed and destruction. By morning, Clara had shared her findings with Jonas. He listened intently, his expression unreadable as she recounted the contents of the journal. When she finished, he let out a long sigh, rubbing the stubble on his chin thoughtfully. "This changes everything," he admitted finally. "If what you read is true, then the entity wasn't some random force. It was a guardian, protecting the legacy of those who came before us." Clara nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the journal to her chest. "And if we don't honor that legacy, if we continue to ignore the pain we've caused, then maybe the vengeance it spoke of won't stay buried forever." Jonas rose from his chair, pacing the small room where they'd gathered. His spurs jingled softly with each step, a familiar sound that somehow felt heavier now. "We need to act," he said decisively. "Not just for ourselves, but for future generations. If there's a chance to make amends, we have to take it." Together, they devised a plan. First, they needed to gather the remaining members of the team who had descended into the cavern. Then, they would reach out to neighboring towns, spreading the word about what they discovered. Finally, they intended to seek guidance from representatives of the indigenous tribes still living in the area, hoping to bridge the gap between cultures and heal old wounds. It wouldn't be easy. Resistance was inevitable, especially among those who preferred to cling to outdated beliefs rather than confront uncomfortable truths. But Clara and Jonas were determined to push forward, knowing that the alternative was far worse. Their efforts began modestly enough. Clara wrote letters to newspapers across the territory, detailing the events at the sinkhole without revealing too much about the entity itself. She emphasized the importance of preserving Native American heritage and urged readers to reflect on their own histories. Meanwhile, Jonas traveled to nearby reservations, humbly asking for advice and support. At first, he met with skepticism and mistrust, understandably so, but gradually, a few elders agreed to meet with him. Among them was Chief Running Wolf, a wise and dignified man whose piercing gaze seemed to see straight through Jonas's soul. They sat together under a canopy of stars, the night air cool and crisp around them. Running Wolf listened patiently as Jonas recounted the story of the sinkhole and the glowing orb, never interrupting, but nodding occasionally to show he understood. When Jonas finished, the chief remained silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. "You have seen the power of the ancestors," he said. "But power alone cannot undo what has been done. Healing requires effort, sacrifice, and most importantly, humility." He handed Jonas a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside lay several artifacts, feathers, beads, and a stone carved with intricate patterns similar to those found on the vault door. "Take these," Running Wolf instructed. "Use them to remind your people of the lessons they must learn. And remember, the land does not belong to us. We belong to it." Back in Blackwater Gulch, Clara and Jonas worked tirelessly to implement the changes they believed necessary. They organized community meetings, inviting everyone to participate in discussions about the town's history and its impact on Native American communities. Initially, attendance was sparse, with many residents dismissing the initiative as unnecessary or even dangerous. But slowly, attitudes began to shift. Children played games based on traditional stories, learning about respect for nature and the interconnectedness of all living things. Adults volunteered to clean up abandoned mines, restoring parts of the landscape damaged by years of exploitation. Even the chickens, once seen as oddities, became symbols of renewal, their presence reminding the townsfolk of the mysteries hidden within even the simplest creatures. Of course, challenges persisted. Not everyone embraced a new direction, and tensions flared occasionally when old prejudices resurfaced. Yet through it all, Clara and Jonas stood firm, drawing strength from the knowledge that they were doing the right thing, until one fateful night, when the ground beneath Blackwater Gulch trembled once more. This time, the disturbance wasn't localized to a single spot. It rippled outward like waves in a pond, shaking buildings and sending panicked citizens running into the streets. Clara grabbed her lantern and rushed outside, finding Jonas already there, his revolver drawn but unused. Together, they watched as cracks formed in the earth, widening until they revealed yet another entrance to the underground world. From within emerged figures, not human, but humanoid, their forms shimmering like heat haze in the desert sun. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting both anger and sorrow. One stepped forward, addressing the crowd in a language unfamiliar to most, but which Clara recognized instantly from the journal. "They've come," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The spirits of the ancestors, they're here." But then, unexpectedly, the leader raised a hand, silencing the murmurs of fear and hostility. Through gestures and expressions, Clara and Jonas managed to communicate a message of peace and reconciliation. To their astonishment, the spirit being seemed to understand and accept. In that moment, something shifted. The tension dissipated, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. The spirits didn't demand retribution. Instead, they offered guidance, showing the people of Blackwater Gulch how to live harmoniously with the land and its original inhabitants. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara and Jonas stood side by side, gazing at the transformed landscape before them. The sinkhole was gone, replaced by a lush meadow teeming with life. Birds sang, flowers bloomed, and the chickens roamed freely, no longer bound by mysterious forces. Little did they know, however, that this was only the beginning, for the lessons of the Wild West extended far beyond the borders of their tiny town, reaching into the hearts and minds of all who dared to listen. The transformation of Blackwater Gulch was nothing short of miraculous. Where once there had been barren earth and desolation, now life flourished in abundance. Wildflowers bloomed in vibrant hues, their petals catching the sunlight like tiny jewels scattered across the land. Streams that had long since dried up began to flow again, their waters crystal clear and teeming with fish. Even the air seemed fresher, carried with it the scent of pine and earth, a stark contrast to the dust and grime that had defined the town for so many years. Clara May stood at the edge of the newly formed meadow, her hands resting lightly on the wooden fence she and Jonas had built together. She watched as children played among the chickens, laughing and chasing one another through the tall grasses. The sight filled her heart with a warmth she hadn't known possible after all they had endured. Yet beneath this newfound peace lay an undercurrent of uncertainty, a lingering question about what the future held. For though the spirits of the ancestors had offered guidance, their presence also carried a warning. The harmony achieved here was fragile, dependent upon the choices made by those who called this land home. Should the people of Blackwater Gulch falter, if they returned to their old ways of greed and disregard, the consequences would be dire. As the days turned into weeks, Clara found herself drawn more frequently to the meadow. It became a sanctuary of sorts, a place where she could reflect on everything that had happened since the sinkhole first appeared. One afternoon, as she sat beneath the shade of a towering oak tree, she noticed something peculiar. Among the wildflowers growing nearby was a plant she didn't recognize, a slender stalk crowned with a single luminous bloom that seemed to glow faintly even in the daylight. Curiosity piqued, Clara knelt down for a closer look. The flower's petals were translucent, almost ethereal, and when she touched them gently, they felt cool to the touch, like water condensed into solid form. Before she could ponder its origins further, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "That is the heart of the land," said the voice, startling her. Turning quickly, Clara saw a figure standing just beyond the tree-line, a woman whose appearance was both familiar and otherworldly. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, and her eyes sparkled with the same light as the glowing orb from the cavern. Around her neck hung a necklace adorned with feathers and beads, much like the ones Chief Running Wolf had given Jonas. Who are you?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm. "I am one of the keepers," the woman replied, her tone gentle but authoritative, "and I have come to offer you a choice." "A choice?" Clara echoed, confusion clouding her mind. "What kind of choice?" The woman gestured toward the glowing flower. "This plant holds within it the essence of the land itself. If nurtured properly, it can sustain balance and prosperity for generations to come. But if neglected or misused, it will wither, and with it, the harmony you worked so hard to achieve." Clara stared at the flower, her breath catching in her throat. "So it's up to us? To protect it?" "It is," the keeper confirmed, "but protecting it requires sacrifice. You must decide whether to guard the heart of the land yourself, or entrust it to others who may not share your vision." The weight of the decision settled heavily on Clara's shoulders. She thought of Jonas, of the townsfolk, of the children playing in the distance. Could she truly bear the responsibility alone? And yet, how could she trust anyone else to care for something so precious? Before she could respond, the keeper placed a hand on her shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "You do not have to decide today," she said. "Take time to consider. Speak with those you hold dear. But remember, the longer you wait, the greater the risk becomes." With that, the woman stepped back into the shadows of the forest, leaving Clara alone once more with the glowing flower. That evening, Clara sought out Jonas, finding him near the outskirts of town. tending to old Samson. The horse nickered softly as she approached, his ears swiveling toward her in greeting. Jonas looked up, his expression softening when he saw her. "You all right?" he asked, setting aside the brush he'd been using to groom the animal. I'm not sure," Clara admitted, joining him beside the horse. "Something happened today. Something unbelievable." She recounted her encounter with the keeper, describing the glowing flower and the choice she faced. As she spoke, Jonas listened intently, his brow furrowing in thought. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment, considering her words carefully. "This isn't just about you, Clara," he said finally. "It's about all of us. If we're going to protect this land and the people who depend on it, we need to work together. No one person should carry such a burden alone. But what if we fail?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "What if, despite our best efforts, the harmony breaks apart?" Jonas reached out, placing a hand on her arm. "Then we try again. That's the way of the West. Always moving forward, always learning from our mistakes. We owe it to ourselves, to each other, and to the land to give this everything we've got." His words ignited a spark of resolve within Clara. She nodded slowly, determination strengthening her resolve. "We'll figure it out," she said firmly. "Together." Over the following days, Clara and Jonas shared the story of the heart of the land with the rest of town. At first, reactions were mixed. Some dismissed it as fanciful nonsense, while others embraced it wholeheartedly. But gradually, consensus emerged. A council was formed, consisting of representatives from various walks of life, including farmers, merchants, and even former miners eager to make amends for their past actions. Under Clara's guidance, the council established rules for protecting the heart of the land. A small garden was created around the glowing flower, tended daily by volunteers who understood the importance of their task. Rituals were introduced, blending traditions from both Native American cultures and those brought by settlers, fostering unity and mutual respect. Yet challenges remained. Droughts tested the resilience of crops, forcing the townsfolk to innovate and adapt. Conflict arose over resource allocation, requiring patience and compromise to resolve. Through it all, Clara and Jonas served as pillars of strength, reminding everyone of the stakes involved and the progress they'd already achieved. Until one day, a stranger arrived in Blackwater Gulch. He rode into town on a sleek black stallion, his cloak billowing dramatically behind him. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but his piercing blue eyes revealed a man accustomed to command. He dismounted gracefully, tying his horse to a post before striding purposefully toward the center of town. Word spread quickly of the newcomer's arrival, drawing curious onlookers from every corner of Blackwater Gulch. Clara and Jonas met him halfway, their expressions wary but polite. "Welcome to our town," Jonas said, tipping his hat respectfully. "My name is Sheriff Jonas Ridge, and this is Clara May." The stranger inclined his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over them with an intensity that made Clara uneasy. "I am Victor Kane," he introduced himself, his voice smooth yet commanding, "and I've come seeking answers." "Answers?" Clara repeated, her curiosity piqued despite her caution. "About what?" Victor's lips curled into a thin smile, revealing sharp teeth that glinted unnaturally in the sunlight. "About the secrets buried beneath your feet," he replied cryptically. "Secrets older than any of you can imagine." Little did they know, Victor Kane harbored intentions far darker than they suspected. For hidden within the depth of the earth lay powers neither Clara nor Jonas were prepared to confront, and the fate of Blackwater Gulch hung precariously in the balance.